Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech protected.
Okay. We're just going to go ahead and get started. So I want to welcome you all here this evening. My name is Rebecca Bover. I'm the Director of Development for New Hampshire Humanities.
Turn it on.
It's supposed to come on automatically. Sorry. I can project too. I don't need a, you're okay with that? So I just want to welcome you all to the third event in our Humanities Roadshow series. The roadshow began with the intention for New Hampshire Humanities to visit each region of the state. After a few years of Zoom, to connect in person with our many supporters, the people who attend, host, and help facilitate our many programs. So on behalf of the staff and board of New Hampshire Humanities, we have a couple board members here tonight. We want to thank you for joining us as we listen to the New Hampshire stories shared through Tom Curran's music. Throughout this year, we will be focused on the theme of stories, exploring how stories are told and whose stories are shared, and questioning which stories are missing. From our perspective at New Hampshire Humanities, this seems like a particularly timely moment to reflect on the stories we tell about ourselves, our state, and our nation. This year, Portsmouth celebrates the 400th anniversary of its founding. In 2 years, the United States will celebrate the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. These dates mark the beginning of the larger stories we tell about the founding of our state and our nation. And of course, and perhaps most interestingly, people have their own complex experiences and individual stories, which when shared, can challenge how we think about the broad narratives. We are opening this conversation with our Roadshow series, exploring the many ways stories are shared, whether through oral traditions, as Anne Jennison shared with us in Portsmouth, through the film Lost Boundaries, last week in Concord, and through music tonight, or as we will experience at upcoming events through the written word and dance. As part of this conversation, we also want to hear your stories. So in your program, you should see a piece of paper with a prompt on it. There should be roughly 4 different questions circulating around. We encourage you to write down an answer to the prompt. It can be a few words or a few sentences, as long as you'd like. You can sign your name to it or not sign your name to it. And we just ask that you will leave it in the basket out by the door when you leave, and we'd like to be able to share these stories going forward. So before the program begins, I'd also like to take a moment to thank Hypertherm, our Roadshow Humanities sponsor, as well as our annual partners, the Leslie Center for the Humanities at Dartmouth, Northeast Delta Dental, our media partners, New Hampshire Public Radio and New Hampshire Public Television, and of course, the National Endowment for the Humanities. Tonight's presenter, Tom Curran, began singing in the mid-1960s, appearing at Boston coffee houses and venues across New Hampshire. With the singing group, The Good Old Plow, Tom has performed at Canterbury Shaker Village, the Shelburne Museum, at New England Historical Societies and Libraries, for New Hampshire Public Radio, on New Hampshire Public Television's New Hampshire Crossroads, and Good Morning America. He has operated a dairy farm, served as a town selectman and moderator, and worked as a conservationist for the Pew Charitable Trusts. Tom has written several town histories and 2 books on New England music, I Believe I'll Go Back Home, and All Join Hands, Dudley Loftman and a New England Country Dance Tradition. And just so everyone knows, Tom's books are on sale in the lobby. If you haven't yet purchased one, or if you'd like to, they'll be available afterward. He has pre-signed a few for you, but I know he's happy to personalize them as well on your way out. And just as a reminder, to all of you, while our events are free to attend, they are not always free for us to put on for you. And we rely on the generosity of our individual donors and greatly appreciate your support. So if you'd like to offer a donation on your way out, we have envelopes available. So with that said, I hope we'll take a moment to welcome Tom.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for your support of the Humanities Council. I was involved in conservation for Pew, but I was primarily development director for them for a long time. And the American way of life can't exist without nonprofits, and nonprofits can't exist without donors and development officers. So it's something we're all thankful for. Well, again, thank you for coming out. I think we're all feeling a little bit glad to be out in good company again, and what we like to think, even though there was a frost last night, in somewhat his hospitable, more hospitable atmosphere than we've had over the last several years. Oh, my name is Captain Kidd, as I sailed, my name is Captain Kidd, as I sailed. My name is Captain Kidd, God's laws I did forbid, and much wickedness I did, as I sailed, as I sailed. Oh, my parents taught me well, as I sailed, as I sailed. My parents taught me well, as I sailed. My parents taught me well to shun the gates of hell, but against them I rebelled, as I sailed, as I sailed. Oh, I murdered William Moore, as I sailed, as I sailed. I murdered William Moore, as I sailed. I murdered William Moore, and I left him in his gore, 40 leagues from shore, as I sailed, as I sailed. And being cruel still, as I sailed, as I sailed, and being cruel still, as I sailed, and being cruel still, the gunner I did kill, and his precious blood did spill, as I sailed, as I sailed. Now to execution dock I must go, I must go. To execution dock I must go. To execution dock, lay my head upon the block. No more the laws I'll mock, as I sailed, as I sailed. Oh, my name is Captain Kidd, as I sailed, as I sailed. My name is Captain Kidd, as I sailed. My name is Captain Kidd, God's laws I did forbid, and much wickedness I did, as I sailed, as I sailed. Thank you. It's kind of a typical song. We can, with a big moral at the end of it. We can time that pretty well. It was, Kidd was executed in 1701, and that song was published as a broadside. He had been in and out of a lot of parts of New England as a privateer, he thought, but he was characterized as a pirate and ended up being executed. And he was off the Isles of Shoals more than once, and there was thought to be his buried treasure out there. But that's a pretty good example of a couple of things. One being the basic, for Europeans at least, origins of our history in New Hampshire and in the seacoast. And the second, again, being the sort of the idea of a moral to every story. That was the Captain Kidd song. This is another glimpse of what village life was like in that early period of time. The Three Jolly Rogues is the song, and it focuses on the reputations of a couple of characters that were part of every village. In good old colony days, when we lived under the king, lived a miller and a weaver and a little tailor, three jolly rogues of Lynn, three jolly rogues of Lynn, three jolly rogues of Lynn, a miller and a weaver and a little tailor, three jolly rogues of Lynn. Well, the miller, he stole corn, and the weaver, he stole yarn, and the little tailor, he stole broadcloth for to keep those three rogues warm, for to keep those three rogues warm, for to keep those three rogues warm. Ah, the little tailor, he stole broadcloth for to keep those three rogues warm. Well, the miller, he drowned in the dam, and the weaver, he hanged in the yarn, but the devil got his claw on the little tailor with the broadcloth under his arm, with the broadcloth under his arm, with the broadcloth under his arm. Ah, the devil got his claw on the little tailor with the broadcloth under his arm. Well, the miller still floats in the dam, and the weaver still hangs in the yarn, but the little tailor, he skips through hell with the broadcloth under his arm, with the broadcloth under his arm, with the broadcloth under his arm. Ah, the little tailor, he skips through hell with the broadcloth under his arm. People were always suspicious of millers, weavers, and tailors because the common people, the farmers, would bring their raw material to those craftspeople, and they all suspected that what they got back was less than that they brought in. So there was that suspicion is reflected in that song. New Hampshire is an incredible state. Those of us who were born here or came here by choice have learned that. Governor Frank Rollins was the founder of Old Home Day, and he was only served 2 years in office in the late 1800s. And he devoted his term of office to promoting the culture, the higher culture of New Hampshire. And he had a theory, and his theory was that as technology advanced, as business advanced, as things got more complicated and modernized in the late Victorian era, that New Hampshire's role would really be to keep tradition alive. And he actually wrote a lot about that. He founded Old Home Day. He helped found both the Society for the Preservation of New Hampshire Forests and the Appalachian Mountain Club. He was a generous supporter of the New Hampshire Historical Society. But he gave speeches all over the state, and he said, Scotland in the British Isles plays the role, Scotland and Ireland, play the role of the culture keepers, the past keepers. And those little villages keep the old ways alive. And as civilization moves forward with breakneck speed, the real character of the people is kept alive in those small villages. And he said that was the role that New Hampshire should play. And I believe it has over the years. I think traditions have been sustained here that have gone out of fashion elsewhere. The biggest sin you can commit in America is going out of fashion. But we don't we don't care as much about that in New Hampshire and keep things alive. One great example of that is the contra dance tradition, which I've had the honor to write about. Dudley Loftman, who's 93 and started calling in 1947. I went to see him. I found an old tape of his from 1972 and got it digitized. Took it to him and I said, "You'd probably be interested in this." And he was, and he started talking about the years that had gone by and the fact that there had been no memoir of him, and that's why just a little over a year and a half ago I wrote a book called All Join Hands about Dudley. And I think it really came home to me just at a point so many times in New Hampshire's history when a tradition was about to become extinct and the last sands were coming out of the hourglass. Somebody, a dancer, a fiddle player, a craftsman, somebody, a poet, would grab the hourglass and turn it over and keep those traditions going. And we see it everywhere in our lives in New Hampshire. And that is what I think has happened over and over with music. One of the things, one of the people who was the most fertile sources, or three people were really fertile sources of the folk boom who were never given much credit. One of them was a woman named, was Granny Fish, who was from Jaffrey. And she was, as a young girl, her father had taken her up into the logging camps in New York. He was a timber buyer, and he would pick out the best logs to buy for furniture and for cabinets. But she soaked up all of the old songs. And as an old woman in the, probably in the 30s and 40s, she remembered them all, and a folklorist named, I think his name was Frank Thomas, came by and learned them all. And those became famous songs in the folk boom. Some of them were English, some of them were Irish, and some of them were Scottish. This is one called Whiskey in the Jar that Granny Fish kept alive. This would not have been kept alive other than that. And eventually, well, it's a rousing song. It's a great song to play at a party. As I was a-walking over Gilgara Mountain, I met Colonel Farrell and his money he was counting. First I drew my pistol, and then I drew my rapier, saying, "Stand and deliver, for I am a bold deceiver. Mwisha-ring-um-durum-da. Whack fall a derry-o, whack fall a derry-o, there's whiskey in the jar." Oh, I robbed Colonel Farrell up on Gilgara Mountain, took the gold to Jenny for to help me with accounting. But Jenny called the guards, Lord, I never saw so many. Almost lost my freedom to my darling sporting Jenny. Mwisha-ring-um-durum-da. Whack fall the derry-o, whack fall the derry-o, there's whiskey in the jar. I'd like to find me brother, he's the one who's in the army. I don't know where he's stationed, be it Cork or in Killarney. Together we'll go roaming o'er the mountains of Kilkenny. I swear he'll treat me better than me darling sportin' Jenny. Mwisha-ring-um-durum-da. Whack fall the derry-o, whack fall the derry-o, there's whiskey in the jar. 'Twas early in the morning in the barracks of Killarney. Me brother took his leave, but he didn't tell the army. Our horses, they were speedy, 'twas all over but the shouting. Now we wait for Farrell up on Gilgara Mountain. Mwisha-ring-um-durum-da. Whack fall a dairy-o, whack fall a dairy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. Whack fall a dairy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. Thank you. We picture this woman was in her 80s singing this song to this folklorist in the late 30s, and it ended up making the rounds. That was a hit record in the late 50s by a group called the Brothers Four on Columbia Records. And later the Grateful Dead did it. There's a wonderful bootleg of the Grateful Dead singing that song. Jerry Garcia had learned it as a young man. And the rest of the group knew nothing about it, and they were just sort of astounded by the story and the whole ethic behind it. And there's a great line where I think it's one of the play, maybe it's Phil Lesh says, "Is that Irish?" And Jerry Garcia says, "I hope so." I don't know what he meant by that, but that's an example of the stories that stayed alive, and because of New Hampshire. There were 3 folklorists, women, actually there were 4 people, who really devoted their lives to Helen Hartness Flanders, of course, was one. Ralph Page was another. Eloise Linscott was another, who collected thousands and thousands of songs in New Hampshire and recorded them with the help of really primitive equipment at the time from the Library of Congress. Archibald MacLeish was the Librarian of Congress at the time, and he helped these women get their equipment together and did an awful lot of taping in towns of way up north, in Stewartstown, in Berlin, in Canaan, and Enfield, and in the Shaker villages, and they kept an awful lot alive. Much of that was not as famous, and I've written about this. The women active in the North never became as famous as the men, the great men folklorists, the Lomaxes, John Lomax in particular, and Alan Lomax. And there were a couple of reasons for that, I think. In the 20th century, the idea of people living in the North and the small towns and the hick farmers was not glamorous at all, and it wasn't anything that people wanted to pay a whole lot of attention to. Well, meanwhile, while John Lomax was busy collecting folk songs out in the prairies and in the western towns, you had Hollywood in the business of glorifying cowboys. So people, when they wanted to hear folk songs, thought that that all of that tradition was largely a country tradition, a Western tradition, cowboy tunes. And then the other, I think, big cultural push that pushed things south was the Civil Rights Movement. And I think people's sensitivity to what had been a largely invisible African-American culture was drawn to the power of the music, starting, I think, with the swing band era, ragtime, actually, even before that. But then later with people like Harry Belafonte. So we, in our lifetimes especially, folk song was thought to be originating in the South and the West. Well, in fact, it originated in New England, European folk song. And people had been singing here since the 1600s. It's just that the image of the farmer or the farm family and the lullaby singer, which is probably the first song most of us have ever heard, was not as glamorous or as popular. So that's, I think, in a way what people like Ralph Page and Eloise Linscott tried to do and keep alive. And I think that's what we try to, over the years, get people's attention and understanding of. And I think in general, people in New Hampshire sensitive to that tradition and to the stories behind them, because all of these songs are stories. So what I'm doing tonight is a bit of a sampler, and we'll leave the seacoast and go further north. One of the great cultural influences were the French Canadians who came down, very largely at first through logging. So this is a song I actually learned from Pete Seeger. It's in French, but it's in enough of a usage that you can probably catch most of it. And it's just the kind of a thing. The rhythm of some of these songs went along with a canoe paddle. So that's what you would hear. Où sont allés tous les rafsements? Où sont allés tous les rafsements? Dedans by town se arrêté, bing sur the ring, bang sur the rung, laissez passer les rafsmen, bing sur the ring, bing bang. Dedans by town se arrêté, dedans by town se arrêté. Des provisions sont apportées, bing sur the ring, bang sur the rung, laissez passer les rafsmen, bing sur the ring, bing bang. Des provisions sont apportées, des provisions sont apportées. Des pork and beans, ils ont mangé, bing sur the ring, bang sur the rung, laissez passer les rafsmen, bing sur the ring, bing bang. Des pork and beans, ils ont mangé, des pork and beans, ils ont mangé. Un pipe de plâtre, ils sont fumés, bing sur the ring, bang sur the rung, laissez passer les rafsmen, bing sur the ring, bing bang. So that would go on for 40 or 50 verses, but it's sort of easy to sort of get the gist of what the raftsmen were headed for, which was a good meal and a good clay pipe to smoke, the pipe du plâtre. Anybody who's done any rummaging in old cellar holes knows that there's often a lot of old pipes that are left there. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the Industrial Revolution and then sort of what happened during the Transcendental period and the Reform period. In the 20s, 30s, and 1820s, 30s, and 40s, we started in a period where many people here in America started wanting to improve things and improve the promise of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And there was a reform period, and it had to do with the vote for women, with temperance, and with the abolition of slavery. And that was definitely part of what illuminated New Hampshire, and New Hampshire played a prominent role in all of those movements. And when it came to song, we played a leadership role through a group called the Hutchinson Family Singers of Milford. They were probably the first popular group that featured a woman on stage in public, Abby Hutchinson and her three brothers. And their repertoire is fascinating. It's a reform repertoire. It's stunningly frank in its embrace of progressive ideals. They did a song called The Old Granite State, where they say they come from New Hampshire, they're friends of emancipation, and they will join the proclamation as it echoes through the nation from the old granite state. And those words they wrote in 1843, which was years before, 20 years before the Emancipation Proclamation. and it's possible, since they sang as Lincoln's campaign singers, that he got that phrase from them. They were amazing people. Get off the track. Get out of the way of abolition. Abby sang passionately about women's rights. And their material is definitely worth listening to. We've got a member of the audience tonight who has studied it and recorded some of it. And really, if you have a chance to seek it out, they're people that we can definitely be proud of. New Hampshire was the 9th and deciding vote to ratify the Constitution. When the Constitution was ratified in, I think, 1783, it needed a majority to become the law of the land, and it was stalled with 8 votes, and we became the 9th vote. And we celebrated that. I remember being at the 200th celebration of that some years ago. But at the 100th anniversary on the State House lawn, the speaker was Frederick Douglass, and the entertainment was the Hutchinson family. So, so that's a story that you should all look up. Amazing people, but they were reformers, but they were also true believers in New Hampshire and in the promise of America as a united place, and as playing a redemptive role for humanity in general. So this is one of their songs from, again, the 1850s, I believe. Maybe a little earlier that they sang, and it's called Uncle Sam's Farm. It's a real look at the optimism that held our country together. Of all the mighty nations in the east or in the west, oh, this glorious Yankee nation is the greatest and the best. We have room for all creation, and our banner is unfurled. Here's a general invitation to the people of the world to come along, make no delay. Come from every nation, come from every way. Our lands, they are broad enough, don't be alarmed, for Uncle Sam is rich enough to give us all a farm. St. Lawrence marks our northern line, where fast its waters flow, and the Rio Grande is southern bound, way down to Mexico. From the great Atlantic Ocean, where the sun begins to dawn, leaps across the Rocky Mountains, far away to Oregon. Then come along, make no delay. Come from every nation, come from every way. Our lands, they are broad enough, don't be alarmed, for Uncle Sam is rich enough to give us all a farm. While the South shall raise the cotton and the West the corn and pork, New England manufactories shall do the finer work. For the great and flowing waterfalls that course along our hills are just the thing for washing sheep and driving cotton mills. Then come along, make no delay. Come from every nation, come from every way. Our lands, they are broad enough, don't be alarmed, for Uncle Sam is rich enough to give us all a farm. Yes, we're bound to lead the nations, for our mottos go ahead, and we'll tell the foreign paupers that our people are well fed. For the nations must remember Uncle Sam is not a fool, for the people do the voting and the children go to school. Then come along, make no delay. Come from every nation, come from every way. Our lands, they are broad enough, don't be alarmed. For Uncle Sam is rich enough to give us all a farm. Thank you. Their concerts must have been incredibly edifying, and the people, they were really, really popular. And it's amazing. We only know this from memory and from sheet music, because it's none of this stuff was ever recorded. These people were all long gone when the recording industry started. And it's kind of amazing, just even in my lifetime, and I've seen this happen several times at points where you really think this sort of thing will just disappear and just be forgotten and go the way of dead languages and, again, other things that have gone out of fashion. But I remember as a kid back the big change in my lifetime, one of the big news items, was when the Russians launched Sputnik into space. And of course, we had to counter with our own technology, and that was Explorer. And a year later, we launched a satellite into space. And ultimately, all of this was a competition with Russia. But it's funny, while all that was going on, and that was very much part of the news, and there were diagrams about the ins and outs of all of these spaceships that we were shooting up into the air. The biggest hit at the song that I learned as a kid at that point, the songs that were popular, actually the line of the song I learned, one of the first songs I learned was, "Born on a mountaintop in Tennessee, greenest state in the land of the free, raised in the woods where he knowed every tree, killed him a bar when he was only 3. So Davy Crockett sort of took the country by storm while we were firing rockets into space. The following year, the big hit was Johnny Horton's The Battle of New Orleans, which featured a story of somebody using an alligator as an artillery weapon. And then soon after that, Harry Belafonte came out with his songs about banana boats, and he was a stunningly handsome man, and he was an amazingly erudite man who just, as you all I'm sure know, just passed away. But see, the contrast between what was happening with technology and what was happening in the culture, it was almost like there was some kind of a balance that was attempting to be struck. And, you know, the same thing happened when we landed on the moon, because that was about the time the folk boom started, and Joan Baez and the Jim Kweskin and the Jug Band and Bob Dylan and all these people started, many of them suburban kids, if we are willing to admit that about ourselves, who wanted to sound like hillbillies. And that was going on at the same time. And what I'm seeing now is that same kind of, even as technology is going places that we never would have dreamt of, and even the people who are in charge of it don't fully seem to understand it right now, there is this increased interest in the traditional music and traditional arts. And music works in ways that logic doesn't work in. Music works in ways that we don't really understand. I've got friends, I used to work up at the hospital in Hanover, and when people had strokes, serious strokes, and were seriously diminished from what they were able to do, they could be reached, and they couldn't respond to the spoken word, but they would respond to music. So there's something going on with music that we don't understand, but in some ways, I think at least, our devotion and fixation upon technology makes music all the more important to us. At least, and I think there's a redemptive part of that. And if you follow the line of thinking, I won't call it logic, that I've referred to tonight, a place like New Hampshire is really important. If it's a place where people take the time or have taken the time over the years, in small towns like Ackworth and Alstead and Sanverton and Nelson, and then areas like West Manchester and even the North Country, and I think I'm not afraid to use the word mission in that regard as to what we're here to do, in addition to selling maple syrup and holding a primary every 4 years. And I think that's something New Hampshire's here to do. And I think that impacts all of us as individuals, but also institutions like the Humanities Council, like the museums, as the repositories, like the Historical Society, the repositories of our memories. And I think I would like to think that it's a trove of values and feelings that will serve us well in the future. And I think it's true of all of us. We have the feeling that our kids are going to need all the help they can get. And let's hope we can leave these sorts of songs behind for them. The great fracture in our lives was the Civil War. I'll sing one song by Walter Kittredge, one of his lesser-known songs, but I think this is a good story. By the third year of the Civil War, the draft was in place, and a lot of people had died. And they were drafting people in middle age. They were drafting everybody that could serve, every able-bodied person. And a gentleman named Walter Kittredge, who was a farmer in Merrimack, was drafted. And he was going away from his family. He had kids of junior high school age, and by his admission, he had a premonition that he wouldn't survive the war. And the night before, he was supposed to go down to Manchester and swear in and get his uniform. He was up all night. He couldn't sleep. And he wrote a poem, wrote a song. And, I'll sing part of it here. And he just dealt with his feelings that way. We are tenting tonight on the old campground. Give us a song to cheer our weary hearts, a song of hope, and friends we love so dear. Many are the hearts that are weary tonight, wishing for the war to cease. Many are the hearts wishing for the right to see the dawn of peace. Tenting tonight, tenting tonight, tenting on the old campground. Tenting tonight, tenting tonight, tenting on the old campground. So after his sleepless night, the dawn came up and he hugged his kids and kissed his wife and went off to Manchester, where he flunked the physical. He had a heart murmur. And everybody else in the neighborhood went off. This was just before Gettysburg. Many of them never came back. he was a farmer. He liked the song. He took it to a publisher in Boston and wasn't interested. And then he took it to Oliver Ditson, who was a publisher on Tremont Street in the old corner bookstore that the Globe ran for years. And that became the best loved song, made him a wealthy man, became the best loved song in the Civil War. I don't remember it. What I remember as a kid, it was going to, I've heard it later, but I remember going to band concerts and having the old people request it and the younger musicians not knowing it. So it was sort of a mystique around it. And I grew up in suburbia. I didn't grow up in, but I think that's just sort of part of what music brings us. And Kittredge went on to be a prolific songwriter, and the great topic for New Hampshire songwriters in the late 1800s was trying to get young people to stay on the farm, because after the Industrial Revolution, and particularly after the Civil War, we lost a lot of young men, and a lot of other young men decided to go away and never come back. So a lot of the old songs, the Grange songs, were about exhorting the young men to stay on the farm. And this is another one of Kittredge's songs. It's a biblical reference. Don't ever turn back with your hand to the plow. To reap you must sow. Would you gather it now? The sun will shine down with its bright cheering rays to chase away darkness and light up the day. Never turn back, but press steady on. Attune the sweet harp anew for the song. Strike the right chord and make this one vow, to never turn back with your hand to the plow. Your pathway, though shallow, will deeper yet grow, and richer the soil if you follow the row. The roots will strike deeply, enriched by decay, as flowers bloom forth with the brightness of day. Never turn back, but press steady on. Attune the sweet harp anew for the song. Strike the right chord and make this one vow, to never turn back with your hand to the plow. Then turn up the soil and work it with care, so broadcast the seed and root out the tare. Look forth on the harvest of bright waving grain. Have faith that your labor will not be in vain. Never turn back, but press steady on. Attune the sweet harp anew for the song. Strike the right chord and make this one vow, to never turn back with your hand to the plow. Thank you. There are literally hundreds of songs that people don't listen to or sing anymore that the Grange sang. And I have had the experience when I was in my 20s of singing some of these songs in Granges and having some of the old timers in the front row singing along with them. There's some great old songs. But we know that the area depopulated, and it's taken past keepers to keep the faith alive. But when the old timers, the Grange had a ceremony for people when they passed away, and I wanted to do a song that they sang called The Old Farmer's Elegy. And it's a touching song. And I think this is one that was regularly sung at funerals throughout that period. On a green grassy knoll by the banks of the brook, that so long and so often had watered his flock, the old farmer rests in his long and last sleep, while the waters a low lisping lullaby keep. He has plowed his last furrow, has reaped his last grain. No morn shall awake him to labor again. Yon tree that with fragrance is filling the air, so rich with its blossoms, so thrifty and fair, by his own hand was planted, and well did he say it would blossom when its planter had mouldered away. He has plowed his last furrow, has reaped his last grain. No morn shall awake him to labor again. 'Twas a gloom-giving day when the old farmer died. The stout-hearted mourned, the affectionate cried. The prayers of the just for his rest did ascend, for they all lost a brother, a man, and a friend. He has plowed his last furrow, has reaped his last grain. No morn shall awake him to labor again. Thank you. There are literally thousands of songs we don't hear anymore. Some of them were Shaker songs. They were spirit songs that came to the Shakers in dreams. This is one that a 16-year-old girl in Canterbury wrote. It's really short, but it's one that I've always been struck with. We found this at the New Hampshire Historical Society. Let's see. Oh, Lord. I want to be blessed, I want to be free. I want Mother's Spirit to rest upon me. Oh, how shall I gain this unspeakable prize that God has laid out for the simple and wise? Unless I do turn all my labors to home, to find my own faults and let others alone. I just think that's such a sweet exhortation to, as my mother used to say, mind your own business. Well, thank you for coming out and listening to all these old songs. I'd like to leave you with one that I wrote, and it was kind of I wasn't getting drafted, but it was the night before I sold my cows. I don't know if you've ever seen Fiddler on the Roof when Tavy has to leave the farm. My heart was broken. It was a way of life that I loved. And I knew at some point these wonderful little girls that my wife and I had started to raise would have to go to college, and I wasn't going to be able to stay milking cows and pay Smith College tuition as I ended up having to do. First year we handled $108,000 and netted about $5,000. But at any rate, I decided to deal with my feelings of losing things, losing the farm, by writing a song. So it's one I'd like to leave you with. It's called The Auction. We were driving down a back road in the autumn of the year, sliding through the pucker brush and running through the gears. We came upon a farmhouse with a dooryard full of cars and a sign that read antique auction here. We got out and walked around that old New Hampshire farm. They were selling all the household things from a table on the lawn. In the angles of the afternoon, ancient shadows lay, and it seemed that we could hear old voices say, build your houses plumb and square, straight and strong and true. Level on the level now, and everything you do. The land will feed your family, and your children's family too. Could it be that you got better things to do? We got out and walked around that old New Hampshire farm. They were selling all the household things from a table on the lawn. In the angles of the afternoon, ancient shadows lay. It seemed that we could hear old voices say, I knew full well what I would find next time I drove around. They'd cut the farm up like stew meat, sell it by the pound. Those fields would sprout commuters in a couple of short years who have got no time for out-of-date ideas. Like build your houses plumb and square, straight and strong and true. Level on the level now, and everything you do. The land will feed your family, and your children's family too. Can it be that you got better things to do? But the clock turns round a circle as this old earth turns towards the sun. Where one thing finds its ending, something else has just begun. And if we're looking for a way out of our self-destructive games, we might take a good look back the way we came. And when the southwest winds of April breathe new life into this land, I'm gonna stand between the furrows with my hoe held in my hand. And if I get a decent season for the singing of my song, here's a seed crop that I'll try to pass along. Build your houses plumb and square, straight and strong and true. Level on the level now, in everything you do. The land will feed your family, and your children's family too. Can it be that you got better things to do? Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for coming out tonight, and thank you for supporting the Humanities Council.
We'd love to open up the floor now. Anyone has questions for Tom? I don't know if the mics are working.
Hello?
Oh, there you go.
Yep. Test.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Can you tell, well, you've hinted at it, but can you tell us how you ended up doing what you do, collecting stories, collecting songs, and sharing them?
When I went to work, I grew up in Boston, and I was exposed to the folk boom in the 60s, so I was predisposed to love music. and then came up here and played in bluegrass groups and so forth. But the real key for me was when I was a development officer for Pew. I was in major donors, and so I was driving all over the Northeast, Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York, dealing with people who were supporting conservation. And I was in the truck, it was about 75,000 miles a year, and I was listening to these songs on my CD player. And I, you know, it was a time where the radio started to get toxic, so I started just listening to all these old songs, and was fortunate to have some old timers in the community who would put things down, and I could record, and I soaked them up, and then it wasn't until actually I retired that I wrote the first book about the Cambridge Boston folk revival, and then got involved with Dudley Loftman and started to write that. So it was a gradual period, but it turned out to be full immersion, and that I was paid to do it, as it turned out. But you know what that is like, making 4 or 5 calls a day, and but there, you had to get there, and that was pretty much it. Thank you.
You referenced Grange Fish from Jaffrey. Was she part of the Fish Quinn family, Mini Fish?
I don't know that. I okay.
She's probably about 115 now, if she were alive.
Okay.
Her family was from Jaffrey, Mini Fish, and then there was Ruth Fish Quinn. Are you familiar with any?
I'm not, but that sounds like it's fascinating.
It is. It's a long story.
Yeah. Well, Jaffrey is in one of those, Tamworth, Nelson, it's one of those towns that, although I suspect it's true in every town, but I'm not familiar with her. Somebody, I hope, is recording and keeping track of all that. Yeah.
Oh, hi. Yeah, thank you. That was really enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you know if there are any collections of these that are notated? Or are they all just, you have to kind of research and...
In New Hampshire, well, I'm working on one now. It's a lot of them. If I had to point to a single source, I'd look at Grange songbooks, which were really popular. The Grange movement was popular. It still is. But some of these songs we found in Grange songbooks. Old Home Days. There are groups that sing at Old Home Days that come together every year, and that we hear singing some of these songs. There are groups here. There are other people on the Humanities Council roster who sing, specialize in this. It's really funny. It's you look at some of the other arts groups in some of our other New England states, and you really don't have that specialty that we have with the old ways here. But I hope we can do, obviously, it's time for us to write some of these things down, and that's definitely what I wanted to do with Dudley Loftman. Dudley's 92, but capture these things while we can. The only reason we have them is somebody 50, 75, 150 years ago thought to preserve them. And, if it doesn't get online, it disappears. And once things are digitized, then they're available and people can find them. But if they don't make the cut, and that's where, I've had to pay a lot of money for some records that didn't get digitized. Some really good folk records from the 60s that nobody has thought were worth digitizing, and you have to hunt for them. So, I would just encourage you, if you have an interest in any particular abolitionist songs or farming songs or songs about women's rights or military songs, I would encourage you, those of us who may have a little more time on our hands than we used to, devote some time to that stuff, and you know, take it to the New Hampshire Historical Society or your town historical society, so that somebody can dig it up years from now and get a better sense of who we are as a people, what our higher culture is. I think that's what the Hutchinsons were getting at.
Yeah, I'm interested in their music a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's really heartening to have people care. It just, you know, many times you sing these songs and it takes people a while to figure out what is this all about. But it really, it's our heritage. It's what made us function as neighborhoods, as villages, and as states, and as a nation. And it does, I find anyway, it does renew your faith.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Tom. For some of our upcoming program, we have some exciting big initiatives coming up that we're going to announce soon. We have 2 more events in our roadshow. Next week in Littleton, we're going to explore the stories of Mount Washington with author Dan Cesny. And on June 28th in Plainfield, on the stage set of the Cornish painter Maxfield Parrish, we're going to feature a dance called the Shire that explores New Hampshire's 7 regions. So I hope you can join us for one of those 2. Otherwise, we'll see you at another event. Thank you.